Hey everyone, I wanted to just talk about Darwin's third place UK Open list. I wanted to talk about exactly what we should be taking from it going forward into branded and why some of those choices worked out for him. Now, we're going to have him on the channel on Monday, so make sure to check out that stream. It's going to be at 4 p.m. EST. We're gonna have him on live so you can ask him some questions about his run there because he ended up crushing the competitions and he posted his matchups. He won against 2 Malice, 3 Ryzeal, and then the rest was kind of just like meta rogue. So I do want to. Wow, this is gonna be a brick hand, isn't it? So I did want to actually talk about the choices that Darwin made and then really just go from there and then what we can take from there for branded going forward. I also did want to talk more about high spirits too, so either that's going to be in this video or the next. So make sure to leave a like down below if you guys like to see these discussion videos on branded where I just get into the nitty gritty. Now, let's talk about the most obvious thing that Darwin ended up running, and that is the boy himself, the card that we really haven't seen in branded in a while, and that is Adlib. So I wanted to talk about Adlib and really why we should be considering Adlib in our branded decks going forward. So Adlib is a card that traditionally came out in branded, when the support first came out, and it was really a mainstay staple until Gimmick Puppet took over for the deck, because this card was always a card you can send off a branded fusion, or once Grand Guignol came out, we were able to send it off the Gwigster and then set up a really powerful play with branded in red with Adlib in the graveyard, so that we can target the Adlib in the graveyard with the branded in red that we end up usually sending to the graveyard either by tributing over it with Lubellion or just sending it off the boy himself, Mirror Jade. And that's kind of what we do, because a lot of branded end boards end on Mirror Jade plus branded in red or branded banishment. At this point, this build is not running Light and Darkness Dragon Lord on my latest deck profile, and obviously Darwin's was not either. So and we'll get into that, why Light and Darkness Dragon Lord is probably not the play for branded right now. I do want to talk about that as well, because a lot of people have been asking that obviously too. And then also just like if lock is viable or not, because Darwin was playing the lock, but he was playing Adlib with the lock. And why is this good right now? Many people might be asking, compared to before, because right now, in terms of the decks that are in the meta between Malice and Ryzeal, Light and Darkness Dragon Lord doesn't really go into those decks very well. X Ryzeal outs Light and Darkness Dragon Lord. And Malice has a lot of Bystials, and Bystials are very good for getting over Light and Darkness Dragon Lord, because you can bait one of the Lad negates and chain another Bystial and then just attack over it. So that that gets rid of two of your Omni negates and kind of makes the interruption not as good as it should be. I think Lad is really good when you're able to use it and absorb the 3 negates, and then your opponent's down 3 cards. But if you're not able to absorb the 3 negates, it usually isn't worth it. So it's one of those situational things that I think actually in this kind of format compared to Master Duel, where it's actually quite good, you see me making Lad in a lot of boards, because a lot of these decks are low attack decks like Snake Eye, and they can't really do much about it. Same with like Millennium, Stun and stuff like that. I think Lad really goes into those decks super well. Same with Tenpai. So especially with all the board breakers, but that's not quite the TCG meta. The TCG meta is Ryzeal and Malice exclusively at this point, with some Blue Eyes and like Odeon weird stuff. But Adlib goes very well into those decks, because instead of making the Light and Darkness Dragon Lord end board, you can set up brand or Adlib in the graveyard through Grand Guignol, and then you can obviously have the Mirror Jade already on board. Your Mirror Jade gets now another banish, so let's just say on your opponent's turn you get the first banish off of Mirror Jade, and now you can send either Albion, Rinbrom, which is my favorite interruption, because if you're able to send Rinbrom on top of this, right, because you have an Albaz in graveyard, which with the Adlib boards you are able to do a lot of the time. So the Rinbrom is going to obviously set up another interruption, but first you get that banish. Okay, great. And then you obviously then have the branded in red, and this is what Adlib is really good for too, because it is targetable by branded in red, unlike Gimmick Puppet. You literally can't target the other things through that. You can actually target with branded in red, and this will reset your Mirror Jade. Now, why is this important? So like obviously, okay, so like you fuse off the the Mirror Jade, the Ad Lib, and then let's just say a random monster in hand, right? Like a Cartesia. Because typically when you run this Ad Lib, I think the best fusion to go into it is the Guardian Chimera. I know a lot of people have chosen to cut Guardian Chimera over Chaos Star Source, and I personally think you should run both of them, all things considered. I think Chaos Star Source is an incredible card, and I wouldn't run a brand deck without it at this point. But I think that Guardian Chimera makes Branded Red just entirely a different card, because you can run two of these, have Branded Red for extension plays, and then have Branded Red for the crackback on Guardian Chimera. And yes, you can have Chaos Star Source, but you can't always make this. You aren't guaranteed to have two dragons on board at every situation, especially in, TCG, where you aren't really incentivized to play more Bystials because there's no Verte Anaconda. I've talked about this in Master Duel a lot, but the reason why I run a hand trap build in Master Duel a lot of the time is because you can run Bystials and you can run hand traps in your brand deck and convert them into a Verte Anaconda, which gets you a branded fusion plus a Rinbrum setup, which is 3 interruptions, right? So that's really good in my opinion. So because we don't have that luxury here, I don't think I really want to be running those hand traps. And I don't really want to be running, more Bystials. So overall, I do like the Guardian Chimera here because obviously it turns into a pop 2 plus a draw, which gets you, extra follow-up. I think the draw always is nice because if you have the Rinbrum sub, obviously that just gets you a necessary discard fodder for the Albaz, which is always good when you have the Rinbrum setup. The only downside to it is that you need 2 discards, and luckily enough for Branded, you have things like Cartesia and Branded and High Spirits to kind of keep in rotation. Even Ecclesia, if you have that in your deck. I do love Ecclesia too, because you can potentially get 3 cards back in your end phase with Ecclesia each turn, which is just insane grind game in my opinion. But the Guardian Chimera, I think, is something that people should be running still, especially if you're running 2 Branded Red. And we look at Darwin's list, he was running 2 Branded Red and 2 Branded in White. Now, or sorry, 1 Branded in White. Excuse me. So yeah, and I'm not currently on Branded in White. I'm not entirely convinced of it. We'll talk to Darwin about that on, Monday, but I really did like the 2 Branded in Red in combination with Adlib with the Guardian Chimera. I thought that was super smart because that gives you an insane grind game, right? Because you're always going to set the Branded Red. He's not going for the retro. He doesn't have a banishment in his deck, right? So I think he needs either another Branded in Red or like a Blazing Branded King. We've been seeing a lot of people on Master Duel run 2 bricks that you can set in the end phase for your opponent's turn besides retribution, so, and like opening. So for instance, Branded Red, Blazing Branded King, and Branded Banishment are really the most popular of those choices that aren't retribution, because you typically go through retribution to get to your combo, unless you go through a Luber, right? So I think running the 2 Branded Red is super important for the grind game, because if you go through the first Branded Red and you survive till turn 3 against your opponent, and you don't have an option to crack back your opponent, you're not going to be looking good. And the thing is, Branded in Red is not the best grind game piece in the game. I think Branded in White for Branded is definitely the best grind game brick that you can run. I call it brick because in 50 card build, you are not resolving that card on turn 1 unless you get hand trapped, basically. Like, the only way that you resolve Branded White on turn 1 is if you're running grass, and this is not a grass build. Darwin did not run a grass build. So I think that, with considering that, I thought I don't still need to run the Branded White, but I do, once again, I think there's a lot of logic to it for the grind game. When this is a format with like 20 hand traps in a dream, a lot of these decks draw 4 hand traps plus 1 starter. So if you're able to stop their 1 starter, it becomes a simplified board state where you guys are interrupting each other with interruptions, whether it's hand traps, board breakers, or stuff on field, right? So with that being in mind, I think you need to come prepared for the grind game, and that's what we've been saying on this channel for a while. I think I've been saying for a bit, running the 2 Mirror Jade is something that really facilitates a really nice grind game. However, I think Darwin really took it to the next level because he's like, nah, we don't need to run 2 Mirror Jade, which between me and you guys, 2 Mirror Jade sometimes doesn't come up in a tournament. It is very nice though, for several different reasons. Like you can just use Branded White as a board breaker, make a Mirror Jade crash and then make another Mirror Jade in your opponent's end phase, so you can help like board break with Branded White, which is really cool. Because you send the Titanclad and then make another Mirror Jade in the end phase. I think that's very good. However, that scenario doesn't happen a ton in this format. Between Malice and Ryzeal, you are really having to deal with if you're able to deal with the cross detonator, Ryzeal's done. If you're able to deal with Malice's really fucked up layered end board, obviously they're done. So I don't necessarily think you're getting to the end phase in order to break those boards a lot of the time. So the double mirror jade doesn't come up outside of like turns 3, 4, or 5, where you need like to make another mirror jade because they outed your mirror jade turn 3, and then you survive till turn 5, and now you're like, okay, I need a mirror jade to go into. I don't have banishment anymore. I don't have Brandon White anymore. So running the ad-lib does that exact thing for you, because Adlib makes it so easy. All you need is 2 Brandon red in your deck. I'd say 2 is standard with Brandon or Adlib, because if you run the 1, like I said, you're going to use it in your standard combo line, unless you run the branded banishment. This could be a little different, because if you run branded banishment with Lad, obviously you're going for the Lad lines. You aren't going to set red, and red will become your turn 3 to 4, 5 card. But I think red is standard no matter what, but I don't, once again, like the Lad in TCG, so I think running double branded in red actually might be a very good option for us. I mean, it obviously worked out for Darwin. He was talking about in his deck profile, which I will link down below. He didn't want to play branded with, a lot of the time the 2 branded red would come up, and a lot of the time you can just lose from not having the second branded red, or like not having a grind game piece. So especially this format with going to turn 3, 4, 5, 6. So having the second Brandon red, once again, very standard, and I think Adlib just mixes in really well with it. And plus you have the Guardian Chimera, you have to run it with this. There are other cards you could also run with it, like I think Predaplant Stapelia, Draco Stapelia is one of those cards too that you should arguably be running if you are running the Brandon red, because it makes it so that you can just go Grand Guignol effect can send the Albion to the graveyard, and then if you have the red setup already, you can make a Stapelia off the Guignol with the Albion in the graveyard, which you can't do with anything else if you only have 2 monsters, right? So it's one of those options in a grind game to make a end board piece that can stick, which I think is very important, and it comes up a lot of the time with 2 Brandon in red, and obviously I think it really does couple very nicely with Super Poly, which Darwin was on 3 Super Poly, 3 Triple Tactics talents, and 3 Droplet in the main deck, which was crazy to me, but I really like those ratios. He was not main decking the Mulcharmy Fuwalos. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to ask him if that was like a budget, thing or not, but he did mention, if he did run it, he would have ran 3 High Spirits. I think he wasn't opposed to the idea. I think he just didn't have the copies, perhaps, and chose to end up running more board breakers, which is always what I've said. One of the most popular comments I get from people are like, which I typically mention in the video, so like, guys just gotta watch the video and pay attention. But I'm always down to answer questions. But a lot of these questions you guys have, I typically answer already. Fuwalos is very good, but you can replace it with other things such as more board breakers. What are the best board breakers this format? Droplet, Super Poly, in Branded. So he ended up declining the 3 Fuwalos and then running Forbidden Droplet and also 3 Triple Tactics talents. And I think that's pretty good. And I think I think Super Poly is overall just what we need, because you turn off the cross immediately and this outs the Malice board. You can out the Abaku plus the Nightmare Griffin, which is super huge, especially with Proskinion. Normal summon a Lubra, dodge Imperm, take out their board. It's crazy. Same against Mitsu, Ryzeal, and just Ryzeal in general. So I think, Super Poly is definitely standard at this point, when a lot of, what you are doing in the TCG is running a toolbox extra deck. A lot of the, Darwin didn't even run Garura Mud Dragon, but he still ended up making Super Poly very useful in his deck. But I do think not having the Garura meant, he had to lean on his other board breakers a little bit. So that's why I think the 3 talents in the main, and then 3 Droplet was very good. Obviously, Droplet just outs the Dweller. Game 1, Dweller isn't as big of an issue. I think a lot of Ryzeal decks, they will end on Dweller if they're given the chance. And obviously, you're not running hand traps, but you do have Bystials and you do have Fuwalos, so they're not always getting to Dweller game 1. You're not always losing die roll, so that's why I'm like, my concession, between me and Keza's list, and Keza obviously top 8'd with my list, I wasn't maining Droplet. I was siding Droplet because I think game 1 you don't quite need it, but it worked out for him because he wasn't running the Fuwalos. So if you're not running the Fuwalos, put in more board breakers and you'll do just fine, just like Darwin did. I think it's like debatable to run Fuwalos or not. I just like Fuwalos a lot with High Spirits. I think going High Spirits, dump Fuwalos into sending Renbrum to the graveyard is cracked because you typically can, you can obviously then search in Albion, the Shrouded Dragon, and then send the Albaz, and then there's an Albaz in the graveyard plus a draw for the Renbrum. So that's just like, this is a Mirror Jade on its own plus High Spirits, which is really cool. Or you could just get the Branded Fusion, obviously. So there's lots of synergy with Fuwalos that a lot of people just don't realize, in my opinion. You can do the same thing with Droll and Lockbird, which is typically my other replacement for Fuwalos if you're trying for more of a hand trap approach. But I don't think Droll is like, it's obviously good, but it's not like guaranteed. He was not running Droll either, or sorry, he was not running Foolish or Goldsark either. And this was, I believe, for Droll and Lockbird. Shout out to Vasilis, just such a smart branded player. I see why he was able to top YCS Birmingham. He mentioned that probably, Darwin was not running the Foolish Goldsark because of Droll and Lockbird being in the format, which, I ran Droll in my deck that ended up topping the regional with Keza's. With Keza, shout out to Keza Doyle, topping over in New Zealand with Branded. Your Move TCG on YouTube, shout out to him. He ended up, running, I believe he ran Allure. It was either Allure or Nadir, and Nadir still plays to Droll a bit. So, I don't think playing into Droll necessarily has to be the top of your radar right now, this format, because some decks are just not opting to even main Droll. I see a lot of sided Droll right now because like Ghost Ogre is just more prescient right now, I think, against some decks. Obviously Mermail's still there, and as the format probably develops now that Tachyons come out, I think a lot of people are playing Ryzeal at the moment, but people will start playing Mouse, and Mermail probably, as people realize those decks are still pretty good. But we'll see with the ban list coming up, and obviously this all changes with the ban list, but this is the format that we're in, and we're arguably going to be in it until YCS Houston. I could see the ban list dropping at YCS Houston and not dropping before that. So TLDR about this video, run Adlib. I think, obviously I was not running this in my last deck profile, but honestly, Darwin kind of flanked me on that. I was already running 2 Mirror Jade. I was like, we need to have an access to a second Mirror Jade. I think that Adlib does that. It's also a dark, right? Like, it's a great card. You can send this off of Gwignall. It makes it so Gwignall has a good third send, which this deck does not have unless you main Ido. Which I do main Ido. That is something he did end up doing. He said he Ido locked 12 times, which is crazy to me at the UK Open, but it does make sense to me, right? Like, it's incredible. This is arguably as good as Gimmick Puppet in my opinion, except it can be out by Droplet, right? So it's just a step below Gimmick Puppet. However, it still ends up being effectively an FTK, which, like, Konami ban Sanctifier and bring back Branded Fusion to 3, but that's just me. And I've always been an advocate of, there are multiple FTKs in the game. You shouldn't just you don't take a tool out of your shed because there is a stigma behind it. You take a tool out of your shed because it is not a good tool. So for this comparison to apply to Yu-Gi-Oh, you keep a good card in your deck because it's good, not because it's going to upset your opponent, right? Like, between me and you guys, I care about winning the tournament, not about my opponent's feelings, right? When I'm at a regional. That might sound cold, but a lot of people are like, oh, I don't run Ido because it's toxic or whatever. And it's like, I think there's an argument, like, when I hear some very good branded players say the lock is bad, but I fundamentally disagree with that, especially when, like, Darwin just locked 11 times when went 8-0 with branded. I think that shows that you can either run the lock or not. Vasilis for his top 32 Birmingham list was not on the lock, right? So a lot of people are like, do I need to run lock or not? You don't. However, I don't think you should ever take out an option in your deck because Konami refuses to address an issue, right? That's just me, and I think that, like, because that's just getting feelings into Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't mean to get all like I don't know, like, PC about it, but like it just gets, I don't think there's a place for Yu-Gi-Oh! With that. Obviously, like, there's toxic play styles, but I don't go to locals. I'm like, fuck the stun player, right? Like, I have to play against stun every day against Master Duel. That's just Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Konami allows these things to breathe in the room, right? Like, these things, they allow it to take up space, right? They allow these FTKs to sit there until they become too much of an issue for the community, kind of like Gimmick Puppet and Calamity. VFD back in the day. So overall, run Ido if you want to, run at locals if you want to, and that's always a thing, like locals versus regional. I don't think you really need to run a lock at regional or locals. I think Brand is quite good even without it. We saw Vasili's top with it, but I do want to say, be on the lookout for Ido, right? Like, this card's crazy. We see Gimmick Puppet, or we see Blue Eyes running Sanctifier now. So if Sanctifier ever gets banned, shout out to Blue Eyes. And they're not summoning Ido, but they're just summoning the Whelp, which Dragon locks. So it is one of those things that you can definitely run, but overall not running, also more TLDR, don't run Lad, because Lad gets outed by X right now and stuff like that. And obviously I was running Lad in the other builds. I thought they were okay, but this is always a progression with Branded. Also, I wasn't playing too much TCG Branded over the last couple months, and now I'm getting much more into it, so yeah. So, and Adlib is the boy. Shout out to Darwin, channel down below. We're going to have him on Monday. Check out the stream, 4 p.m. EST. If you guys want to see more videos like this, let me know. We should be streaming also right now, Master Duel, if not tomorrow on Sunday. So come check that out for the rest of it. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. This was just another episode yapping about Branded. Just wanted to review the top choices from the UK Open and why you should be running them. Basically Adlib, double Branded in red, and then considering, alternatives between Molcharmi, whether it's triple talents, and then triple droplet, right? Also debating between Allure of Darkness or not, because of Droll format, I don't think it's not, right, if you don't run Allure, okay, run the Talents then, right? Because Talents is it does get you the draw too, but can also do other things and break the board, which Allure does, but it plays into Talents, or into Droll, whereas Talents you can still use under Droll. So, but it's not always live, right? Which I like about Allure. And a lot of this format is like Imperm Pass, so let's see. Leave a comment down below. If this video gets 200 likes, we will do an updated video. And with that being said, leave a comment down below. And check out my website, MetaGamesGX.com, if you want to pick up my branded spreadsheet. Also pick up some branded merch, all that fun stuff. And Ryzeal merch now. Subscribe today, road to 15K subscribers. And bye.